Hi there, Sarah. Sarah
Hello.
Rosen. Finally, I meet the person I've been following. How are you?
So nice to meet you. I'm well. I'm well.
Yeah,
Happy to be here.
yeah.
Thanks for inviting me.
So I have Sarah here today. She's got a long bio, but a good one. And you have now, you're certified in peaceful parenting coach, you're a speaker, educator. I'm actually a reader. I follow you in the Globe and Mail newspaper. You live in Toronto, 3 kids, same with me. Yours are a little older. And you have created peaceful parenting as a non-punitive, connection-based approach. And now you're working one-on-one with parents all over the world. And you want to help guide them, give them tools, and make them feel comfortable within their parenting. Is that the best bio ever? And we wanted to focus on how helping parents learn to set boundaries, limits, and how to cultivate a happier home.
So sometimes I do get parents who come in, they're like, my 5-year-old just won't listen to me, and I've taken away all their toys. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but we threaten to take away stories, and he's not going to get his video games or whatever, and it's not helping. He's getting worse. So I really help those parents understand that.
Back to boundaries, yeah.
Well, I mean, in what we talk about in peaceful parenting, we don't use consequences in terms of punishment. We love natural consequences, which I want to remind your listeners that a natural consequence happens without any involvement from the parent. So if you have to try and think, what should the consequence for this be? You're going into punishment territory. That's not a natural consequence. A natural consequence is like if a child throws their toy in anger and the toy breaks, the natural consequence is that the toy has broken, right? If you have to think of what you're going to do next, then you're getting into punishment territory. So what we like to so it doesn't mean kids just do whatever they want, right? It's not like, well, we don't have any consequences in our family, and everything, all behavior is acceptable.
Yeah.
It's not. We talk about limits. That's what we talk about in peaceful parenting. So
can you explain maybe what one limit would be?
Sure.
Give an example for parents who may be interested in your approach to parenting.
Yeah. So if you're playing in the backyard and your child is using a stick to hit the daffodils, and you say, "Hey, don't hit the flowers, sweetie. Those are mommy's flowers, and we want them to stay there and be beautiful," and your child continues to hit the daffodils with a stick, you might have to take the stick away, right? So that's the limit. You might have to do something to support that limit. You're not doing it to make them feel bad, right? Yeah. So sometimes in peaceful parenting, we do have to remove a child from a situation. We do have to remove something from the child, but it's in order to help our child meet our expectations. In that example, the expectation is don't hit the flowers with the stick, right? And the child's not listening or having a hard time following our expectations. We might have to take the stick away, but we're not doing it to make the child feel bad. We're not doing it to, quote, teach them a lesson and now you're going to go in a timeout because you weren't listening to me. And so it's really, it's about limit setting. Sometimes you could do the same thing that could look like a punishment, like your kid's running away from you at the playground and won't stay where you can see them.
Right.
You might have to leave the playground, but you're leaving the playground, I'm so sorry, you're having such a hard time listening today. We're going to have to go home because it's not safe that you keep running away from me. We'll try again another day. Is totally different than, that's it, I've told you 5 times, we're going home now, right? So you might be both cases. You have to leave the playground, but your tone is, kind and empathetic when you set a limit, and compassionate. And your intent is just to help your child meet the expectations, not to make them feel bad. Sometimes they will feel bad, but that's not why you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, one of my other questions that I have for you too is, in order for us to help in education and when I coach and when we go to sports, we're seeing that children are not as respectful. How would you cultivate trust and bonding to help with trust with your approach?
Well, children learn to be respectful by being respected, right? That's how they learn to be respectful. So if you talk to your child in a rude way and assume that, they're not trying their best or whatever, or you're going to, you know, I'm trying to think of an example.
Yeah.
You know, not take their feelings and thoughts into consideration, because that's respect, right? Respect is when you take somebody else's feelings and thoughts into consideration. If you don't model that for your child, they're going to grow up not thinking it's important to take other people's feelings and thoughts into consideration. If you, you know, the grown-up equivalent of like sassing someone would be just like saying whatever you feel like just because you're upset, right? You do that to your kid, they're going to learn that they can do that to a teacher or, you know, a coach or to you or whatever, right?
Anyone. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we see that in the schools. It's usually a directive. It's usually one child that does not respect their coach, their teacher, the principal, the recess teacher. And it is a ongoing issue. But then when we meet the parent, apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yeah.
The parent does not respect the teacher, the principal, the recess teacher, or the coach. And you can see the links. Like if I were coaching a competitive team, I have actually a contract that I have the parents sign with a bunch of different rules to be the supporter, not the coach. And I make it clear to them that I'm here to help your children develop volleyball skills, fundamentals, and to become a team player and a productive adult. So I cultivate the soft skills as well as the hard skills. And parents have a very hard time respecting that choice that I make. Even though I see where the child, the athlete is, I see the one kid giving me some lip, a little bit of lip and a little bit of edge, being disrespectful. I can tell you which parent is their parent, right?
Well, and also, honestly, like if the only reason why your child is not, let's say that your child might not speak to you in a rude way because they're afraid of getting punished. They're afraid you're going to take their phone away or ground them or whatever. If it's fear that's motivating your child to not show respect, because there is, you know, when I talk to people who were, you know, raised by parents who are more traditional, they think of respect as fear, right? They think, well, you know, we were brought up to respect our elders.
60s and 70s.
What they really mean is we didn't dare say anything against our elders. We didn't dare talk back. We didn't dare say no, right? Because we were afraid of what would happen to us. This is the thing. If you raise your children with that being the most important thing, that's extrinsic control, right? They're not doing it because they're afraid of what's going to happen to them. When they get older and they're not afraid of like, well, what are you going to do? Like to the teacher or whatever, you know, well, you're going to like, you know, keep me after school or, you know, to whoever.
What are you gonna do?
If they're not, if they don't think you can hurt them or they're not afraid, if you can't control that child or that adolescent, then yes, they're going to be disrespectful because they were taught that respect means you're afraid of somebody who can control you and make your life painful. And if they don't come up against that, they're like, oh, I don't care, right?
Yes, and you know what? It's I really kind of ironic that you're saying that, because I am seeing that combativeness. It's combativeness that we see in the schools. They combat with the teacher. They're even combating with the supply teacher. Like, I don't have to listen to you. And it's really worrisome when I see suspensions and expulsions are increasing to a level I've never seen before. And yet,
well, I mean, if
in remediation.
you know, Larissa, I'm sure you've seen the research, but the research shows that punishments do not help people make better choices. They don't. You know, kicking a kid out of school who's having a hard time in school, it's not gonna. It doesn't look at the root of the problem. Yeah.
And that's why I've been trying to. In England, I was just starting to work, and in Boston, before COVID happened, and they're like, how would we bring the parents into a more involved situation and help the children? I said, you need to get the parent involved. You need them to do a project, and this is not a suspension. Either the parent comes to school with the child and they sit in the remediation room to fill out this project. It's more of a discovery of their relationship and boundaries and rules and what is expected. And it's amazing the results after this happens, where the parents like, I don't really want to come in here every day, you misbehave. So the parent has to think, oh, well, I better start working with my child. And it forces the parent to make a decision how they're going to parent, what's going to work. And I wish we had the resources, like if we could have you in a school as a parent counselor or a parent resource. In England and parts of Germany, they supply that right there in the school. And those people are run off their feet. They're actually looking at hiring more parent counselors in England. And here in Ontario, we have none of that.
Well, I mean, we do have guidance counselors, but
They
you
don't,
know, I
they
think,
don't do this. They don't do parent counseling.
yeah,
Yeah, none at all. Yeah.
I think also, I think most people, and at least from what I've seen, are still in the punishment camp, right? Like,
Yes,
you
they
know,
are.
I have clients who have like little kids in kindergarten and in grade 1 who the teacher will come out and say, you know, so and so was bad today. We would really appreciate it if you could give them a consequence when they get home, like don't let them watch TV or something like that. Like, what?
What?
I know.
Okay, I will, yeah, I don't agree with that, but yeah, no, like I agree with what you're saying, but I would never,
Yeah. No, I mean, it's just
I would
most
never say that to a,
I know, it's not
give them a
crazy.
how is that even?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you have a lot of different strategies and tools and models for parents. How would you, when a parent signs up to work with you, what do they expect? Like, what is the process that you work with?
Well, I mean, you know, there are a couple big ideas in peaceful parenting that I kind of want to make sure that people have, that, you know, they're moving in the right direction in those areas. One of them is self-regulation, a fancy way of saying not yelling at your kids or worse.
Yep.
And you know, that's always a place to start with parents, because you can't.
Can
I
you
could give
elaborate
you
that on that self-regulation? Because I don't think a
Yeah,
lot
so
of,
self-regulation is basically like, it doesn't mean you never get upset with your child. It means that you learn how to calm yourself when you do get upset. So say you came to me because you had a really strong-willed kid and you could barely move through the schedule. Like they resisted getting dressed, they resisted brushing their teeth, they didn't want to come to the table, like, you know, all of that stuff. I could give you a 5-inch thick folder with strategies, but if you couldn't control yourself, like if you couldn't regulate yourself when your child says no, you know, you can't make me, you can't use any of those strategies, right? Like if your kid is making you see red and pushing all your buttons. So that's a place we always look at. Okay, how's your self-regulation? Do we need to start by looking at some strategies there? We also want to look at connection. How's your relationship with your child? You know, especially with the strong-willed child.
yes.
You know, your relationship is the biggest way that you have to influence your child. And I know you have older kids too, and like as the mom of 3 teenagers, I have learned how important it is that kids care what we think, right? And that relationship is why my teenagers are so easy. Like I never thought I would say like, oh, it's so easy having 3 teenagers. Like my husband and I, when they were little, were like, oh my God, we're gonna have 3 teenagers at once. They're amazing. And it's not because I'm so great or they're so great. It's because they were raised with peaceful parenting and they care what their dad and I think, right? So that connection, that relationship, if things are feeling difficult with your child, I always like work on your relationship. I just did a masterclass the other day about strong-willed kids, and I had a surprising, my audience tends to be sort of like 10 and what I thought was, you know, sort of parents of kids 2 through 10, but I had a whole bunch of parents of teenagers that were in this masterclass. And they all wanted to know, like, how do I get my teenager to do X? How do I get my teenager to do Y? And in every one, I was like, I know I sound like a broken record. You have to work on your relationship. You have to work on your connection.
All comes back to connection, Sarah. And I was just on another podcast telling this other psychologist that I've been, now this is my 30th podcast in like 5 months. It's just rolling along. And I was shocked when I sat back and I look at my notes from each podcast before I go and write a description. All of you, it doesn't matter who it is, whether it's a family doctor, a sports psychologist, a parent coach, a teacher, a principal, they all come back the same thing you just said.
Yeah.
Connection,
Yeah.
bonding, and security attachment. And if our children, and the latest Canadian Pediatric Society statistics say, children are on their phones for 4 to 6 hours a day. And if parents are on their phone for 4 or 5 hours a day, well, that's 80 hours a month. That's 960 hours a year that you don't have any bonding time with your child. So when are you bonding to build and connect? And I had to readjust my relationship with my daughter. And it took more time and it was very hard. But I had to change my mindset as a parent and realize that the things that I was raised with are not working with her. She's different. She's an introvert. And I had to really listen and connect and spend more time with her, the little bits of time, and everything comes back to connection.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's our human capital, right? Like that's like we literally survive when we're born because we have a connection with a caregiver, right? Somebody else cares what happens to us.
Right. We hope.
Yeah. Well, we're wired to seek that connection. We're actually wired to be, and that's why one of my big mindset shifts for peaceful parenting is to recognize that kids are doing the best they can. And when you look at a kid who looks like they're being, kids, that doesn't mean that they're not being provocative. That doesn't mean that they're not being defiant or difficult or challenging. But if they are acting that way, there's something out of alignment, because that is not our natural state, right? Our natural state is to be close and connected, back to the connection thing. And so when the kid's acting out, it's like, okay, well, they're doing the best they can. They're having a hard time. They're not giving me a hard time, right?
Right. And it's interesting, when I survey older kids, like in high schools, which a lot of the teachers within high schools who are the sociology teachers teaching them psychology and whatnot, they ask the kids, do you feel that your parent is your landing mat? And they explain what a landing mat is. And they say, no, whenever I go to talk to my parent, they don't listen, they criticize me, or on the ride home from sports, they just criticize me, or they criticize me in music. And I'm hearing a lot more negative from children than I ever did before. And I think with the increase in technology, extended technology time, there isn't that time to bond. So I think both aspects are affecting the relationship now.
Yeah. You know what I also think that criticism is coming from? Everything feels uncertain in our world now. Is my kid going to get a good job? Are they going to get into, are they going to get
prior to COVID? Are you speaking to COVID, or are you speaking?
I'm speaking in general, like with our shrinking economy, at least in, it's not, when my parents were teenagers, it was like, of course they're going to get a good job. Even when my husband and I were teenagers, like there wasn't any, we could study, art and humanities at university and still get a good job when we got out of university. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's changed a lot. Like there's a lot of uncertainty, there's more competition. And I think parents are worried, right? Like they want their kids, there's so much pressure to like be the best and be successful and get a good, get into this good university and get good marks. And it's all this fear-driven stuff. Yeah. And so, I don't know if you know the book, The Self-Driven Child. And the guys in it talk about, am I frozen? Did I just freeze?
You're okay.
Am I back?
Okay.
It's okay. So The Self-Driven Child. Okay. So the book, The Self-Driven Child, is a wonderful book. If you don't know it, you should run and get it as fast as you can. Yeah. So you know how they say, parents today have this fear, and they say it's not Harvard or McDonald's, right? Like it's not like total utter failure or great success. Like there's a lot of middle ground. And I think that fear that it's either Harvard or McDonald's drives us as parents to be more critical, right? That's where the criticism comes from.
Well, don't you think that the solution to that, I mean, from now, maybe because I've gone through all these different experiences and from my background and my schooling, is that in order to give kids confidence and the ability to want to seek something else, during this time, we give them more autonomy. During this time, I say, do you want to go to university? My daughter's in grade 12. Do you want to go to, what do you want to do? What is your body telling you to do? Her dad's emergency medicine. We know the statistics right now. Do you want to live in a dorm? Will you feel comfortable living in a single room? She's trying to get her scholarship. She can't get a swimming scholarship this year because there's no racing.
Yeah.
So she's shifted academically. So I'm like, you decide what's going to work for you. I'm supportive of whatever you do, because no matter what, our children will eventually figure out pivoting and maneuvering and changing. And as long as we're supportive and they always know we care and we're there, I think that's the important message to give parents.
Well, and whenever I sense that a parent's operating out of a place of fear, and that's where that wanting to control, and I have to make them do this, and whenever I have a parent that I'm working with who's operating out of fear, I always say, what would you do if you weren't afraid, right? Like, what would you do if you could just love your child and support your child in that moment? What would you do if you weren't afraid that you had to teach a lesson, or you had to prepare them for the future, or whatever? And that's often like a nice shift that parents can make. Like, ditch the fear. What would I do if I weren't afraid right now? What would and what if
I
it's
really like that, Sarah.
Yeah, and like, what would I do if I weren't afraid of what other people think, or afraid of the future, or afraid of whatever it is I'm afraid of in this moment?
Yeah. And I think by relinquishing that and letting that go, and at least putting it here and saying, I acknowledge this. This is why I have to put it at the back and say how to support, how to help, how to listen. I had to ease off my daughter, right? She's different. And I had to sit back and listen, because she's introverted and quiet and shy, right? And I had to really gravitate and figure out what does she need from me? And so I actually shifted for each kid, and even my spouse. It became relationships are better now, even during such a tough pandemic time, but this is even pre-pandemic. But I think more parents are afraid of letting their kid not go to medical school. Well, what they want to go into broadcast editing? So what? There's better jobs. There's jobs out there. So let them do it. They're going to be happier, but they're afraid to let go of what they think is right. Is that what you're saying? Like Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or they're afraid that I've got to make them see, or I've got to,
There was a
control the
convincing
situation.
episode of that, right? Yeah. Well, one of the questions, we were just talking about the pandemic, and prior to the pandemic, I have seen a tripling in anxiety, suicide, and depression through the Canadian Pediatric Society.
Wow.
What are your worries for children's futures if parents are not providing them with emotional skills that they need?
You mean specifically with the pandemic, or in general?
In general.
Um,
And I guess we have to say include it, because we've got to get through this. This is 3 or 4 years, right? This is not 1 year.
Oh gosh, I hope not, Larissa.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My husband was in a meeting. Yeah, it's like 3 or 4 years of being masked, and you can't vaccinate everyone, right? So
I think that I think they're two different. I have my own fears about the pandemic and feeling bad about my kids who are launching age, and not being able to launch in the way that they would like to. I mean, I know you're probably thinking the same with your daughter. But I know this is a moment in time with the pandemic, and we're going to get through it. We're resilient. It's not fun right now. I know, lots of people are suffering from feeling alone, not being able to do the social things or see family or whatever. And I do believe that that's shorter term. I mean, I guess my fear when we are using, the conventional parenting that I was talking about when we first started chatting is basically using shame to try and shape children's behavior, right? Making them feel bad, making them feel like they're not a good person. And no parent would say, oh yeah, raise my hand, I'm using shame to try and control my child's behavior. But that's what's at the root of conventional parenting. And then I see, like, broader culturally how there's a lot of that going on, like with everything that's been going on in the US with the election, and people not listening to each other and people not, basically trying to like shame the other side. Nobody does better out of shame. Like nobody. The only way that we can do better is through compassion. And I try really hard to have compassion for people who don't agree with me. I try and have compassion for my husband when he's, being cranky, for my kids when they're being difficult. So my fear is if we continue on the same, punitive, shame-based parenting, making people feel bad to try and get them to make different choices, we're just going to see an amplification of all of the division and unlove that we're experiencing in the world right now.
Yeah, and I think I agree with what you're saying. I'm seeing that the more empathetic and the more compassionate we are as people and the more kind, like my kids are helping our neighbors with soup. The guy can't get out of his apartment. We're bringing groceries to our older neighbors. We're bringing baked goods to people who don't get out to get the treats. And I think our little communities, if we just make them more cohesive and show our children that compassion, hopefully they see it and they do it later on in their lives. But if we don't model it, they won't see it. Right? And it's important. I want them to see compassion and to be productive human beings, right? Now, part of your coaching, you have a challenge. I'd like you to share with our listeners what your challenge is. You had a...
Oh, sure. I
thought that was great, but it didn't work out for my timing. I'm like, oh.
I have a program called the 21-Day Stop Yelling at Your Kids Challenge.
Yes.
And sorry?
I like the title of it.
Yeah. You know what? Through my whole career as an entrepreneur, I've always tried to think of like snappy names for things. But what I find, like I have a membership group, and at first I couldn't think of a name for it. So I just called it the Peaceful Parenting Membership. A year and a half in, it's still the Peaceful Parenting Membership. I couldn't think of a better name, but you know what? The How to Stop Yelling at Your Kids Challenge, everyone knows what that is. The Peaceful Parenting Membership, everyone knows what that is.
Yeah.
So, yes, very straightforward names. So it's 21 days of tools and strategies with worksheets and a journal. And basically it walks you through like day 1, do this, day 2, do this. And it's spread out over 3 weeks because we really need time to change a habit. 3 weeks isn't even like 3 weeks is enough to get a really good start. Yeah, but you do need to, I don't think anyone would do it if I said the 67-day challenge though. I mean, probably not, but that I think
might not work on that.
Yeah, I think that's what research shows is around 67 days to change a habit. And that doesn't mean that you go from nothing to completely change. Of course, you're making progress the whole way. But yeah, my Stop Yelling challenges, because I said like when you asked me what the process of working with parents looks like, we always start there. We always start with self-regulation. You can't change your children's behavior. You can only change your response to their behavior. And that's what will change the behavior anyways, is changing your own response to it.
And that's an important piece. I wish parents could go to like a parenting school before they have a baby and they could learn how to handle tantrums, how to handle sleepless nights, how to handle a colicky baby, how to handle all of these challenges that they might meet. And I think almost now a parent today almost needs that education. There's no instincts. They're not working from a...
Well, the problem is, Larissa, is that we used to raise children in community. So you would see, like you used to have a lot of people today, the first baby they ever hold is their own child, right? But if you grew up in a community, you would have been taking care of your little cousins. You would have seen 3-year-old tantrums and not think that it was such a huge deal. But we are raising our children so isolated. There was an amazing article, I think it was in the Atlantic, that was called the failed experiment of the nuclear family. And basically how...
I think I read that.
Sorry?
I think I read that.
Yeah, basically how taking mom, the traditional mom, dad 2.2 kids and having them isolated in a house where they're not near their extended family has been a failed experiment. It's not good for anyone's mental health.
Yeah. Just like the pandemic.
Yeah.
Finding people like somebody said to me, one of the psychologists goes, it feels like, because as an adult, you're grounding us. We're being grounded. We don't get to go to dinner. We don't get to go to movies. We don't get to have our parties. We don't get to have our social aspects. We have to stay isolated. And human beings naturally are social. And we need bonding and we need connection. And this is taking away. I mean, I would not want to be a single person in this.
Yeah.
It'd be very lonely.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of like our single friends, we really try and include them outdoor at a campfire or go to their back door and have tea, and making those connections with people who need it. And now our Finder Society, I hope, is doing those things now instead of being selfish. And I know that some people are autoimmune challenged or have cancer and we have to stay away from them, but there are ways of like Zooming with them.
Yeah.
Like getting around thank gosh, we have technology now in a pandemic. Because you imagine doing this in the 70s?
I know. My friend Carrie has she has a company called The Long Distance Grandparent, and she helps grandparents find ways to stay connected to their grandchildren who are, I mean, she originally started it before the pandemic, like, you know, you live in Texas and your parents live in England or whatever, and you're trying to stay connected. But I was talking to her and I was like, we need all of this now, even though our grandparents are 2 blocks away, because we're not going over and hanging out with them on the weekend or whatever. Like, but she has so many awesome tricks and tips and apps that she has told me about. And
let her give me her name. I'd love to interview her.
I will. Yeah. And
that'd
she's
be great.
like, there are so many things in technology that you can use to stay connected, which is really nice.
Well, my husband is a physician in 2 nursing homes. And since this started, he has seen a complete demise in dementia, depressed, isolated patients. And
and again, we're talking connection again, right? You take away connection. Yeah, you take away connection and people start to fail.
It really quickly, rapidly. And although I know they're aged and they're in a home, but the lack of stimulation, the lack of interaction, the lack of the brain working, our brains need to talk. It wards off dementia disease. Dr. Hutton out of the States MRI children's brains, and right here, the linguistic part of the brain. And sadly, he was saying that 1 to 2 hours a day, the brain is not that affected by technology. But beyond the 2 hours, he was saying there are children who have no brain activity in this section of the brain because they're not putting words together.
Oh, geez.
They're
That's
so
scary.
quiet. They're just watching a screen.
Yeah.
And they're not using their words and elaborating on their vocab. And in just JKSK, the teachers are saying the children can't put a sentence together. So there is a connection between the technology, the isolation, and parents who are not connecting with their children.
Yeah.
Even on a fundamental basis of self-talk, which is talk, right? Like, so even in psychiatrists and psychologists are saying it's hard to teach parents to self-talk to their children and teach it when the children don't have vocab.
Right.
Because they can't associate happy with a happy face and stuff. Like they're not getting that connection. That broke my heart.
Yeah, that is heartbreaking.
You know, and I hope by doing this thing and what your friend is doing for her the grandparents, like, look, I don't think we saw my dad the other night for the first time in a month, and it was all outside. Yeah. And, you know, we don't want to get them sick, and we're trying to do the right thing. But wow, did his face ever light up? Like, we got to have candles, which we didn't blow out. And we played darts outside in the back garage. It was 20 degrees in November, which for our birthdays is always a crappy month. Yeah. And it was amazing to see the lights go on in there, and the discussions were passionate, right? And we're really I hope we're going to take social interactions more and value them more from now on. After this whole thing.
I hope so too.
Well, I want to thank you, Sarah, for being here today. And I really have gravitated towards your approach with parents and raising children in this way. I think it will raise a lot of very compassionate, productive, empathetic people who we need today.
Mhm.
So how can people get a hold of you, Sarah?
My website is sararosensweet.com. There's lots of links there to my free Facebook group, which is an awesome support group for parents. I've got a lot of free resources and blog posts. The Stop Yelling Challenge that you mentioned is there on my website. And people can also book a free short consult if they're interested in coaching. That's available there too. You can get on the wait list for my membership for when I open the doors again. So really it's all housed there.
Okay. All right. And then in terms of the tips that we want to share today with our parents, I'm going to say them, and at the end, if there's something you want to add, just go ahead and add it right in. Okay.
Okay, great.
When I listen to what you're sharing, I'm hearing that, and I've heard from almost all of our guests here, that we need to connect.
Mm-hmm.
And by connecting, would you agree? I could add in there, it's the time bonding and talking, right? And having that time with your child to build.
Well, I think it's laughing too. We can't, talking is nice, but laughing and playing, and that's the biggest bonding that we can do is when we laugh with somebody else.
Yeah, and if we don't have that, and I'm hearing from what you're saying in your approach that it's very hard to have our children, as you say, do the chores, because we don't want to put a fear-based action there for them. If you don't do this, I'm going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Give them a punitive punishment. I think it's better to have those natural consequences that you're saying. They're wonderful when they happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like you forget the gym shorts at school. Mom, can you bring my gym shorts to school? No. You're okay.
See, I would bring the gym shorts at least the first time. I mean,
I give them one whammy. I give them one shot. That's it.
Yeah. Well, and if your child has a pattern of forgetting things, you don't want to like bring the gym shorts every day for a week, but you also want to say, hey, you're having a lot of trouble remembering your gym shorts. How can I support you? What can we do so that you don't forget your gym shorts? Do we need to put a note on the door? Do we need to put them into your bag the night before? Right? It's about scaffolding.
Yeah.
It's about scaffolding. So
he never forgets anything, right? So when he did this, I gave him a one whammy. I said, next time, what's mom going to do? I have to remember to go through my list in my head of what I need every night. He knows.
Yeah.
But he just, now he's getting older, 14.
Yeah.
And he's like, that mindset is like, you tell him something and it's gone the next minute. So he needs reminders.
Well, and also kids that age, in the early teen years, their prefrontal cortex is really still developing. So they do get very forgetful. And the reason is that their brain is going through the second renovation of childhood, right? And so they are actually very forgetful. I'll tell you a funny story. My son, when he was about, when my son was about 14, he's 16 now. He came in after we had like a family gathering or something, and there was cake, and he was like, oh, can I have some cake? And I said, sure. He a few minutes later, he's like, who took my cake? And I was like, nobody. We were all sitting around the table. He's like, somebody ate my cake. He was getting all upset. I cut myself a piece of cake and it's gone. That night when I was cleaning up dinner, I opened the drawer where our plate, like we have all our plates in a drawer in our kitchen in the island. I opened the drawer and there's a piece of cake on the stack of plates that he had cut instead of taking the plate out, he'd put the cake on the plate in the drawer and then shut the drawer. So like they're very truly forgetful at this age.
It really isn't. It's grade 9.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem to be, it's just that year. I'm finding really like a focus, but one of the other tips you said that when parents come to you is to learn how to self-regulate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think that is a major component of if we are taking care and awareness of our own composure and emotions, that translates over time to them. And it's so important.
It translates in real time to them, Larissa, right? Like when our child is having a meltdown, however old they are, if we can't stay calm, then it's going to escalate things, right? Like they actually co-regulate with us. So it's over time, yes, we're modeling good emotional regulation, but in the moment when we can stay calm, that actually gives our child an anchor, right, in those stormy seas. So it's really interesting, because usually in the coaching process, a couple sessions in, the parents say, this isn't even really about my kid, is it? This is,
That's wonderful.
yeah,
That's
they come to
really
me
great.
because they want me to change their child, right? And they're always like, why don't you work with the kids? Why do you only see us? I'm like, well, you know, you're the one who's uniquely situated to support your child. So I support you, so you can support your child. But then they always end up saying, this isn't even about my kid. This is just about me. And I'm like, that's the big secret.
Yeah. And I'm glad to end on this note, because really, like, when I see my parents, ultimately it's the same thing. I teach them how to connect. I teach them how to bond, how to be consistent in routines, and how to decrease the phone time. But really, I'm actually working with the parent, and they keep wanting to send me their kid. And I'm like, no. Like, I want you. And then all of a sudden, everything starts to improve in their home life, because there's routine again, and there's compassion, and there's laughing, and there's calm.
One of my mentors, Lynn Lyons, who's a great anxiety specialist,
great.
she says she will only work with children if their parents are present, like anxious children, right? And she said, in fact, if I had to choose between working with only the parents or only the child, I would work with only the parents. Like, it's that important, right? It's the parents are that important to the child's development and behavior.
And it's interesting you say that, because therein is support for the non-suspension remediation. We have to bring the parents into that scenario. If I could just speak to the parents and help them, we wouldn't see the behavior that we're seeing.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, we wouldn't be seeing that. If we could just bring them in, I'd rather actually speak to the parent than the child, and have that nice, calm discussion. And now that's a whole other story. I'm getting angrier parents, right, when they come in to talk about their kids. And for instance, in a school setting, right, when the Johnny hit Sally with the ball at recess, and the parents like, not my kid.
Right. Yeah.
Defensive, and they're getting very.
That's because of shame. Like, we're back to shame again,
we're
right?
back to accountability.
They feel like a bad parent if their child is done something, and we have to say, no, you know, that, like, you're still worthy and lovable, even if your child is acting out at school. And like, how can I support you?
Yeah, and there isn't enough of that. Because in the school system, I find I almost want to bring all of you, like, great parent coaches in and sit you down with a parent and a family to help, because then we would see our triple fold anxiety, depression, and behavior just go right down, like it does in England, because they have these parent counselors in England. It's a remarkable system. It's millions of investment, but the outlie of that and the result of that is there's less mental health in the healthcare system in England later on. So, well, thank you, Sarah, for being here today. And I invite everybody to go to SaranRosensweet.com for her Peaceful Parenting and connect with you.
I'd love to connect with your listeners.
Thank you. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.